Good morning, PSU. My name is Sean Rabbitt. I am a senior consulting engineer for identity and access management, which means I read manuals so you don't have to. Wait a minute, I write the manuals too. That's another story. Anyway, today's session on managing user identity on Macs, I'm intending to try to ramp up a little bit here. So we'll start off with some real basics at first, and then we're going to get into the craziness and some future speculation of what might possibly have happened sometime in the near future. So to bring everybody up to speed, just in case you didn't realize, this is the very, very first computer that ran Unix. This is now about 60-something years old. It's a great thing to know, but here, macOS, the important thing to remember for all you Windows admins out in the world, macOS is not Windows. macOS is very much Unix. And Unix has in its basic core account management based on group and user permissions. So you have your user short name, you've got a hierarchical file structure based off of this basic information of what that user can access. And each individual user has essentially privileged access management to get into different resources of that shared computer. So back when it was a PDP-7, maybe not every single user was supposed to be able to have admin rights on the box. Not that there was admin rights of much concern at that time. So we'll talk about local user accounts first, and we're going to start off real basic here. We're going to go into the wonderful world of the GUI, because everybody loves visuals. It's always good, so that's where you start off in the beginning. So if you go to System Preferences, and you hit the Users and Groups, you'll be able to see some basic information about the user. And if we want to make a new user account, I like to call out a couple things that we need to actually have in here. We need to make sure that we have a new account type. Is this going to be a standard administrator? We're going to have a name, an account name, which is going to be their Unix short name, and a password. Great. We're starting off real basic. But then, of course, someone introduced the concept of option click. So if you option click on a user, you see more details about that individual user, and you get some more details that get into the more Unixy things. So inside here, I'm going to have things like their user ID or their basic group information, and things like the UUID that's assigned to this particular user, which is a little bit outside of the Unix spec, and aliases and Apple IDs. Starting to get a little bit stranger, isn't it? The fun thing is you can do the same exact thing creating groups in this exact same GUI out here, and strangely enough that if you actually sit there and hit the refresh button, you have your very own built-in UUID generator. Why? Hey, why not? It's there. It's cute. So we've got the basics. We've got the UID, which is the unique identifier for this user on this particular computer. We've got a real name for the user. We have the Unix primary group, which we're going to get into a little bit later when we talk about the platform single sign-on world. We have our Unix short name, which, while it may look like you can put it in camel case and different users may want to put in a capital letter for their name, surprise, macOS ignores all that fun stuff. You have your login shell, your home directory, your UID. There's an Apple ID button inside here, which you probably in the managed space will never see. If you go through Setup Assistant and you allow the user to enable FileVault, but then also let them reset their password with their Apple ID, it'll pop up in this place. Kind of fun. Who knew if you actually saw that inside there? And then you see some aliases that you can actually add in to your Unix short name. If you happen to go in here anytime, in fact, you might even try it on your own laptop, and if you were able to do that password reset using your Apple ID, you might see this weird com.apple.idms alias inside there. That's actually a unique identifier to allow Apple to reset your password with your Apple ID. Kind of interesting. Now, sir, not appearing in this presentation so far is the Unix user groups, and we're not going to get deep into that yet. But what we should probably do is get to the real details and actually jump into some command line stuff, because that's way more fun for us nerds. So let's start off with the basics. Who the heck am I? Now, the trick here is that each one of these different commands may actually operate in a different manner based on the context. So who am I works even if you sue to another user. I will be able to know, hey, I'm currently this logged in user. You could echo the user from the shell. So Z shell has a variable built into it. But surprise, you can't rely on that, because if you decide that you are going to write a script, you could actually just rename that variable and go bonk. It's never going to work. And then, of course, you can also do what Armin says, which, thank you for letting me steal this here, which is to try to figure out from the SC utility command to figure out who the current console user is. So if you are actually writing scripts, even though you might be running as root as the agent on that device, if you use this command with SC util, you can find out who actually is the logged in user right now. Useful information. Also, Scott Blake, if you're in the room, this is entirely your fault because the slide's here. Thank you very much for breaking everything. So let's get into a little bit more fun. Let's go read some directory utility information. So the discal command, good command to know off the top of your head. Let's read absolutely everything. Let's run the user command here and see who will. By the way, I am using standard bash variable substitutions here for my examples for anybody who's never played with this before. So the $ user is intended to be a variable. You would put in a local user account name here in this place instead. So you might see that throughout the demonstrations here. And we run this command and we get a big old pile of info. By the way, you will get a bigger, more ugly pile of info if you run this as root. So if you sue this command instead, you'll have a huge pile of more stuff. Also not appearing in here is, for some reason, they will actually encode the entire JPEG of the user's graphic inside of this command, which makes it real fun to try to find information about a user, always entertaining. And you know, there's a lot of stuff that's in here that we just happen to have seen recently in GUI land. If we get a little close-up inside there, hey, there's everything we just saw in the GUI. Isn't that great? I've got the user's home directory. That might be useful for scripting. I got their name. I got the shell that they're using, their unique ID. Fantastic. So we can get all the same stuff out of the command line that we can get out of the GUI. Guess we can just ignore GUIs forever now at this point. So if you wanted to get down into the deep depths, you can actually grab individual keys with the discal command. So in this particular case, I can grab the information about the authentication authority. And authentication authority might include information about, like, did this person get a Kerberos ticket recently? Or do I have a machine bound to Active Directory? Might be able to derive a little bit of information outside of that. Some of the information that's handled inside this, this directory of the user information is actually in its own separate little plist inside there. Inexplicably, just XML tossed in. Why not? Let's do anything these days. So if you ever do need to get any of that information out of that XML document, please don't write your own sed and grep and command in order to do that, because I made that mistake. And there's actually a command that reads those individual keys out of the plist for you automatically. So things that are useful inside there might be, what's the very first time that this user account was created? When did we have the last failed login? Which might be good for security, get that information out. We can also just dump that entire user record in XML format for further munging. So if I wanted to do different things with scripting, I can just dump it right out. I can also add new record information in there. So in this particular case, this user is a particular menace to me, so I added that in, and I decided I'd delete the comment afterwards because I don't want to violate any HR policies. So we got a lot of information out of there, but there was something missing from this list that was definitely in the GUI that we didn't have before, and that's how do we figure out if this person's actually an admin account or not? And surprise, there's another command. That's right. Don't wait. Don't worry, ladies and gentlemen. There will be a billion commands. And these are our slides are all going to be available up on my GitHub here for you too afterwards, so don't panic. We can actually just do the ds edit group, and it's edit, right? So it must list the commands too, right? Of course it does, because we named it this way strangely. So we can actually see that this person is a member, we can actually see the group membership in this case of who's in the admin group here. So I've got this weird Jamf management account, never know where that's going to come from. And root's also a member of the admin group, go figure. I also love that root always has the same UUID, this FFFFEEDDDD. It's fun. No matter which computer you're using, it's great. And of course, there's a command to list all the groups on the device too, so that way you can figure out what groups are on the device. But remember, we're not talking about groups yet. We'll get to that later. It's gonna be fun. What I love is they did actually create a command that makes it super easy for me just to chop off the very first value returned. Is Sean a member of the admin team? Awesome, it'll return a yes or no as the very first value. So if we just return, print $2, sweet, we can actually see a yes or no answer for our scripting. Makes it a lot easier. And of course, it's not worth just knowing if somebody's a member of the group. If you can't promote them or demote them, which is my favorite thing to do, just run a script out there that says, bye-bye, admin rights are gone from everybody on this box. Write a script, run through all the users. Stolen directly from the Make Me Admin script, available on GitHub, by the way. So I am working on the shoulders of giants for sure. So once we figured out all the basic user information, great. We're good there. Now, what's the first thing a user is going to do when they create a new user account? That's right, they're going to forget their password. So of course, there are literally, these are the 4 that I found just off the top of my head, the 4 different ways that you can change a user's password. So why the heck are there 4 different ways to change a user's password? And this becomes more fun when you realize that, oh yeah, we're Unix. We've been around for the last 60 years. Of course, there's a billion different ways to do stuff. So different things will happen in different contexts again. So for example, the sysadmin_ctl command up here does not work with sudo rights. You have to have the name of a local admin account on the box in order to use that to change someone else's password. But password policy will work just fine. Go figure. So depending on what your context is of why you need to change that user's password, there's different options for different things. Fun times. Speaking of sysadmin_ctl, this seems to be the command line application that everyone just decided, yeah, let's make it do this. Great. So I can create users, I can change their passwords, I can turn on or off the FileVault secure token. So for those Windows admins that are watching this later, that's the full disk encryption. It's BitLocker for Macs. We can actually turn on and off auto login, which is great for kiosk machines. Make guests accounts able to be run or not, which if you're using any of the CIS guidelines, you probably went to Alan's presentation there earlier and turn that sucker off right away. And then we can, of course, turn on and off sharing and guest access inside here too. But wait, there's more. Why does it do things like this? Automatic time is turned on and off? I don't know why it's in there. Turning on and off the screen lock, yeah, this is just literally, they didn't know where to throw it, so they threw it in this app for you, the Mac admins of the world, to be able to play with it. How do you know about it? It's a little tool called Man. Life is good. There's plenty of stuff that this app does. Feel free to check it out someday. Another very useful tool to keep in your belt, password policy, PW policy. It does more than just reset passwords. In fact, if you want to get really, really evil and you want to start doing terrible things to your local user accounts on your Macs outside the MDM, you can set all of your account password minimum restrictions manually right there in the command line. Yeah. More than 4 minimum characters? Now we'll make it 16. You have to have a letter from your 3rd grade teacher inside there too. Why not? But the most important one to keep in mind is this very, very, very last command, this clear account policies. Why do you need to know this one? Well, as it turns out, there's more than one way to assign account password policies on a local machine, and there's this little thing called MDM. So MDM allows you to throw down a config profile onto the box and then say, okay, here's your minimum password requirements. What happens when you decide that your security team has gone psychotic and said, okay, we now have to have 20 character passwords or 200 character passwords? And yes, I've actually talked to people who are like, they don't need to know their own password. We put it in one password. Great, now they got to type that every day? It's like, if you apply an MDM setting with account policies on it, and you then just go in and unscope it, it does not take away the account policy from that user or that machine. Unscoping the profile does not necessarily clear the policy. You have to run the command to clear the account policies on the device for it to actually clear that out. And there are 1.5 billion payloads that contain things that might need to be cleared with this clear account policies command. So if you go into Jamf Pro, a little MDM that some people have used in the past here, you go to a passcode policy. We have passcodes in here. We've got passcodes using the login window command has got passcodes inside here, which I just did this up in the standard Apple configurator app here. And they show it in different ways, but they have different things that you can do inside here. There are jokes on the slides too, by the way. Feel free to giggle every once in a while. Anyway, if you got to quick enough fast. We've got iMazing on one screen. We've got Jamf Pro. They've all got different login window profiles. And they're in 6 different areas and different payloads inside here. So there's a login window payload inside of a different payload. There's restrictions profiles that may affect how you can fill in passwords and if you can log in automatically, if the screensaver turns on. And then, of course, they have to add more passcodes in here. Let's go into the security and privacy. Can people change their password? Can they not? Would I have a lock message? The trick here is that when you're setting these local account policies via MDM, they're going to be in a bunch of different payloads, and it's because macOS has lasted for a very long time, and it's built on Unix, which has lasted for a very long time. So as people have added features inside there, they've added payloads. They haven't consolidated it down. It's in a bunch of places. Don't panic. Look through everything. You will find all its stuff, and ask your community if you want to do something specific on that lock screen. We'll all help you out, I swear. That's how we're all here together. So section 1 is complete here. There are a bunch of useful commands to know. They are great in scripting. They're good for knowing in the back of your head. They're going to be in the slides. But if you don't keep and take a screenshot of this slide now, don't panic. We're going to go on to something completely different. All right, ready for a contest? All right, the first person tell me which one of these slides does not belong, or which one of these pictures does not belong in this next array of slides, and just like say which corner it's going to be, all right? Which one doesn't belong here? 3, 2, top right. All right, we got a winner over here. Why do I have 4 pictures that look almost exactly the same? All right, the first one is, this is the FileVault decryption screen. The FileVault decryption screen looks an awful lot like a macOS login screen. It is not. macOS isn't even running right now. You can tell that this is the FileVault decryption screen because if you look in the upper right corner of the screen, you're actually going to see a keyboard picker. This is unique for the FileVault screen. The next screen that we see here is actually the real macOS login screen. Gee, it looks awfully familiar, doesn't it? It is almost exactly the same, but the only difference here is that I now see a different piece up there, which is I can pick a Wi-Fi, and it shows the time, because macOS is actually running. The next one is, of course, the famous I've woken up and now the screensaver's kicked in. This is not an authentication screen. This is not actually, if you read the CIS guidelines and tell me you need MFA at this screen, you are misreading the guidelines. I'm just going to outright say it. There you go. This is the wake up from screensaver screen, and you can tell that it's running this one because in its upper right corner, we got the full bar. I can pick the keyboard picker, change the Wi-Fi, and see the current date and time. Why is that all there? Who knows? It's just the only way to figure it out. And of course, upper right, this is the cheater one here. This is actually the Jamf Connect login screen, which you can tell by the beautiful powered by Jamf logo down there in the lower right corner and the keyboard picker up the side. But why did we talk about this? You will, no matter what your security department begs of you, pleads of you, please use a hardware authenticator, I want to have passwordless login, et cetera, for all eternity and forward until Apple makes a change, you will have a local macOS login password on your device. Sorry. FileVault exists in a place before macOS boots up. So they make it look really pretty, and it is gorgeous. They own the whole stack, so they can do this. The idea is that this is actually happening either in an Intel box as part of the EFI firmware pre-boot sequence, or if you're running Apple Silicon, macOS is running, but it is a read-only version of the operating system that has no access to any local drivers or anything. So macOS is not fully booted up. Once you type in the password here, then the user partition of the drive is actually decrypted. We can read things like device drivers. We can do things like load software and extensions. This is not macOS, no matter what anybody tells you. So any software vendor out there in the world that says they can do passwordless on a Mac can't get past this, because this is Apple. They control this. The only other thing that's an option on this screen is if you are running an Apple Silicon-based processor and you have paired that device with a smart card or a PIV card, then you can unlock the screen with something that is passwordless. The built-in, the question was, do drivers have to work? That is correct, but the drivers that are for smart card reading do actually work at this login screen. There's a little bit, I'll have to ask somebody smarter than me if the USB driver is actually capable of reading at that point. You may have had to give it permission ahead of time.
It is.
Okay, the USB driver we've confirmed is working. Thank you very much. It says from the one person who has a USB-driven smart card PIV attached to the machine as we speak. Mac Admins Conference is why you come. I love it. All right, so this is actually what it looks like in real life here for you. So you have your startup sequence. Is FileVault enabled? If yes, then is automated login enabled? macOS has a built-in screen reader named, anyway, macOS has a FileVault automatic login flag available to it. So this is enabled by default. If you type in your password on that decryption screen, macOS will actually pass the username and password in plain text, by the way. No one needs to know that. It'll pass it in the memory to macOS once it boots up, and then it'll use that username and password to authenticate that user and get it into their session. Cool. You can turn that off if you want to. If you are in a high security environment, or if you are using something like a PIV smart card, you can have a separate username and password completely for making sure that the user can decrypt FileVault, but have that user account not actually be able to log into the machine, which is another one of those useful commands that you probably would use for the password policy to be able to disable a user, by the way. Fun times. Now, the only other option that happens, and the user might see the macOS login screen twice, is if you didn't disable any of that, but somehow your local user account's password fell out of sync with the FileVault password. And I'm not going to get into the details of exactly how to reset that right now, because there's a fantastic write-up right here for you that if your user account ever falls out of sync, run the commands that the HCS group documented. It's fantastic. I refer to it on a regular basis. When you do a normal password reset or password change, it should not fall out of sync, but it can happen. Speaking of which, what happens when the user forgets that password? Great. Well, the good news is you turned on FileVault. And I'm going to jump specifically to the third set of instructions here, option 3. Being good Mac admins and being good folks that have MDM commands out there on all of their computers, and they're all managed, right? Right? They're all managed. Absolutely. Nodding approvingly. That means that you have your FileVault recovery, personal recovery key, individual to each device, available in your MDM or through some other place like crypt, right? Of course, good. So that is literally the best way to reset that local user's password. Don't use any sort of local account-driven password. Don't do anything that involves a lapse account. This isn't Windows. Mac OS, again, is not booted when FileVault's not on. So use this option and the recovery partition in order to reset your local account password. Fun times. All right, let's jump into the next exciting section here. So I do want to give a content warning to everyone who is about to hear this next section, because it might bring on a little bit of trauma. That's right, we're talking about binding your Mac to Active Directory. So, binding your Mac to AD was a really great idea at one point, and any technology decision given a long enough period of time ends up being the wrong one. But AD was nice because, you know, you had that centralized place for all your user accounts. We went back to good old client server. We had common credentials to get into everything. I could easily throw a Kerberos ticket onto that device so it could access all the resources. I could get it to mount file shares automatically. That's great. So Mac bound to Windows Active Directory. There's at least 3 swear words in there. And depending on your level of religious affiliation, that might be a good thing or a bad thing. But yeah, binding Macs to AD always was interesting because AD thinks it's running on Windows machines, but Mac OS is Unix. So, okay, we got to kludge things together. So when we did this, we could make a local user account on the device. And all these local accounts that were bound to AD were network accounts. So now all network accounts could sometimes become mobile accounts, which means I now have a local user account record that is a local account that's bound to Active Directory that needs to talk to AD, that needs to keep in sync with AD, and this will always be a problem. So this is always going to cause pain and suffering to anybody who's involved with it. You can actually find out if a user is bound to Active Directory and has one of these network or mobile accounts by good old Discal. Yay, remember that back in the beginning of this presentation? Gee, it's almost as if I had said all these things about user commands because I was going to use them later. It's great. Original node name gives you the information if that user account is bound to AD. And of course, you can also do things like read the authentication authority to see if there's got a Kerberos ticket, but don't rely on that because you can get Kerb tickets in different ways. So a mobile account just happens to have the same password as your Unix account or your AD account until it doesn't. And a mobile account and a Mac can stop talking to AD programmatically designed after 180 days by default, unless you have changed that in your AD settings, and it will unbind itself from Active Directory, which is why, don't take it from me, Apple, for at least 3 years, at the Worldwide Development Conference, during its sessions called What's New in Managing Apple Devices, has said, do not bind your Mac to Active Directory. Please. There are exactly 3 scenarios why you should use this. One is you are in a lab or shared desk environment where a machine is literally chained to a desk and is never going to leave that network, ever. 2, you are in a highly regulated organization where you absolutely have to validate the chain of the PIV smart card certificate every single time in order to get into that Mac. And 3 is your network team made a terrible decision and tied the Radius 8021 cert to a user directory name bound AD instead of a SCEP-based cert. And the problem there is that if you're at the login window and you're bound to Active Directory, macOS basically does a replay of the user's credentials, which makes it work, but you better be on that network. Just don't do this. Please don't bind to AD. We don't want you to bind to AD because it's bad. Anyway, so we're still stuck on AD. Let's try to figure out what we have for options instead. So that's where Apple originally came out with the idea of what was it called? I just had a complete brain fart there. Anyway, Enterprise Connect, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Mac admins community, I love you all so much. Thank you for supporting me. This turned into what's called the Kerberos single sign-on extension, which we'll get into a little bit later of the new updated versions of it. The great thing about this is you don't need any extra companion applications. You can have that local user account still be a real, honest-to-God local user account. The machine is not bound to Active Directory. It'll have the same password as AD. Best thing, if it goes wrong, you call AppleCare and make it their problem. Fantastic idea. An alternative, of course, is Joel and Josh wrote beautiful Nomad many moons ago. It is free as in beer. It does require a partner application which sits in the menu bar and goes out, and they do the usual things. They get the Kerberos tickets, they can get and mount file shares. It's great. Just keep in mind that there's a huge difference between being bound to Active Directory, which is the directory tells that network account, this is your password. Hard stop, end of story. As long as that device can talk to the domain controller, if it's bound to AD, that password, you could change it in AD. Awesome. And now they forgot their password. I'll go into AD and I'll change your password to whatever the I'm not even going to say it because I love the BOFH, if you know the acronym. That's the series that was a blog series back when I was in college. But yeah, you can go in and just change the password to anything. You know, I forgot my password, Mr. Forgetty, 1234, etc. But when you do one of these alternatives, like using the Kerberos single sign-on extension, it's not a password sync utility as much as it's a password nag utility. So if a user has just decided to go offline or ignore all of the messages saying, hey, your password's out of date, that's fine, because let's say that they lost their network connection, their password is their local password. Even though you've changed it in the directory, their local password still works. They can still get into their machine. They can still FileVault decrypt that machine. They don't need an always persistent network connection. So it's good, but it's a nag. It's not an enforcement. Just keep that in mind. The alternatives can all do fun things like get curb tickets and mount file shares and get your home directory and get your password sync and whatnot. There's only one thing that they don't do, and that's make user accounts. So in order to do that, you have to have two options as an alternative. One is you let the computer go through Setup Assistant and make its user account in the standard way. macOS has a built-in screen reader named VoiceOver, et cetera, et cetera. This is going to create what's called an MDM managed user when you go through and make the very first user account on a Mac. And the MDM managed user means that that one user account on that unbound machine can get a user level profile pushed down from the MDM. User level profiles may contain information like email settings, or it might contain things like 8021X Brady asserts username and password for an individual user. Great. However, if you are not bound to Active Directory, literally only that user, the very first user account that's created with the Setup Assistant, is this MDM managed user. Any additional user created on that machine, either through the GUI, through users and settings and system settings, or if you were to do something like use no load, no more Active Directory login screen, it is a machine that you just pretend is an iPad. There are no user level profiles available to it. If you have been binding your Mac to Active Directory in the past and you relied on user level profiles, they will break. They will just not show up on your machine. You will see an error in the logs that say this profile was unable to be installed onto this box. This has been a point of contention. There are several feedback assistants out there that have been filed. So file a radar if this is something important to you. If you want to give that feedback, that has to go to Apple. There's only one way to make it so the second user can actually become an MDM managed user on the Mac, and that's to re-enroll the machine in the MDM with admin rights. So profiles-n, sudo profiles-n. Otherwise, it's gone. You can hear more about me ranting about MDM users. Sorry, I should have put the rant a little bit tag a little bit further out. But I do actually have a write-up on what's actually happening that's up at this QR code here for you. So let's just pretend that on-prem doesn't exist. So what happens if, I don't know, everyone decides that they need to go home and stay in their house for 3 years? Well, we're going to need something. We need a cloud directory instead. And the good news is that we can still use a cloud directory to replace that on-prem Active Directory. What if we had Nomad, but it was for the cloud instead? Well, it turns out there is. Joel and Josh ended up writing what was the first tool that did this, which was Jamf Connect. And since that point, Jamf Connect has also had some additional folks join it in the crowd. There's an open source tool called Xcreds out there. There's also Mosel Auth and Kanji Passport, which I'm not going to speak too much about since I don't work for that company, but I do believe they have to be managed with their MDM for that to work. But they all work almost exactly the same way. And that is your user's login screen gets replaced. The login window mechanisms go from the macOS login screen to show you instead a pretty login screen for your identity provider.
Let's take a look at how this.
Sorry. If you have a cloud identity provider out there in the world, the login will give us the same information that we would normally see if we saw that good old first screen in the GUI. So we get an identity token back from the ID provider. And this is literally an ID token, like an actual physical one for you. This has got the same information inside of it. And I'm going to put in here a stunt double for what would come back from an OpenID product. This is actually SAML instead because it's a little bit more readable. But don't worry about trying to decode this tiny stuff up on the screen. I'll call out a couple pieces in here. Hey, look, there's a user's real name. There's a username. And what do you know? Here's some groups that they belong to. That looks like it might be useful if we wanted to do something with it. Yay, we can make user accounts with that information. So we've got everything that we need in order to be able to build that user account. Oh, right. I still need to get a password. So there is a mechanism built in all these tools in order to grab the password. And in Jamf Connect specifically, we go out to the identity provider with that username that came back and that user's password that they typed in. And we go out and get a yes, no, is that the password or not? And that endpoint is built into the OpenID Connect spec, and it's called Resource Owner Password Grant. It replicates what would happen if you were talking to Active Directory. So it's just good old-fashioned password flow. Here's a username, here's a password, here's a token. Come on in. That's what it's doing. And that's the exact same thing that it does at the login screen, and it's the exact same thing that the menu bar application of all these apps does every X minutes. So it goes out and hits the endpoint. Jamf Connect, it's by default every 60 minutes, and says, hey, is the local user account password still 12345? And if it's not, it says, hey, your local user account's out of sync with your cloud identity provider. Here's the nag situation. So it just comes back and nags you a little bit and says, hey, you need to get your password back in sync. But when that happens, your account password is still in sync with FileVault, so your keychain is updated, your FileVault's password's updated. If you still have a hybrid environment where you're on-prem and off-prem, you can still grab a Kerberos ticket using those credentials, but without binding the Mac to AD, which is great. Keep in mind that none of these tools are miracle workers. They do not just magically go out and bash through firewalls in order to talk to your domain controller. So if you do need to get a Kerb ticket, you might need some other sort of ZTNA solution, which might be built into Jamf Connect. I'll talk about that later, but it's not a sales presentation, so I'm not going to deal with that. Anyway, this is local user accounts. And more importantly, with all of these tools, your local login window could be set up in one of a couple different ways. It could be, I want everyone to be on the network every time, absolutely. I want everything logged in the identity provider. I need that in my SIM. I want all those security events. Until you get fired by the CEO because she gets on an airplane and gets on, and it's 12 hours to London, and there's no network connection, she can't get into her computer, in which case you can always force it to network login unless there's no network found. Sweet, do a local login then. Or you could just say, I want, after the user account's created, sweet, you're on, have a machine, it's your account, I'm managing your computer, no problem, enjoy. Get into your computer, use your local user account. This is what it looks like to an end user when they're actually coming in for the very first time. If you're doing something like a zero-touch enrollment into your computer, you could just drop ship computers out to people. It's going to go out and hit the automated device enrollment system. We'll take that serial number, tell it go talk to this MDM server. Chances are pretty good that your MDM server will support the ability to sign into it with a single sign-on solution. So in this particular case, we're showing a login to Microsoft Entra ID, which has just changed, and then that's tied through Federation to ADFS. And you can customize this. This isn't Jamf Connect yet. This is just good old-fashioned enrollment customization. We can push down a copy of Jamf Connect onto the computer as part of the enrollment process. So we can immediately replace the login window screen. I've passed that information from that first login there through the enrollment customization. I took those SAML token attributes, passed over the Jamf Connect and said, okay, user, just give me your password one more time, and then we'll go out and make the local user account. Some of those tools have the ability to actually hold the user at the login screen here, so this might look familiar if you've ever seen DEP Notify. As it turns out, Joel wrote that. Joel wrote the first version of Jamf Connect, so Joel just copy-pasted his code right in there, which means that you can actually hold users at the login screen to make sure that essential tools like endpoint protection software are installed before they're allowed to destroy your precious, precious devices. And because we read an attribute out of the user directory there, we can actually make the very first user account a standard account and turn on FileVault without a reboot, which is very, very nice. And the user doesn't actually have to interact with anything. Like the password's already stored, it's charged up there, it's just gonna check it every 60 minutes by default. And the only time that they should really ever have to interact with any of the menu bar agents is when their password changes or expires. We can also grab Kerberos tickets here, of course, too. Now, if a user's password gets out of sync, again, it's a nag utility, it's not an enforcement force utility. So we'll go in and change that very complicated password to the password on my luggage, 12345. You got the joke, life is good. Reference jokes for the win. And we're just gonna force it along here. We're gonna tell it to sync. Normally this would happen by default every 60 minutes. And there's that local account password coming up saying, hey, you need to get your passwords back in sync. It wouldn't be a good tool if you didn't go ahead and have the ability to enforce that on users. Of course, you can report if the user account's in sync with the identity provider password, and then of course you can use Jamf Pro or whatever tools at your disposal to encourage the user to make sure that their password's in sync. Maybe like force them to log out where you absolutely can enforce the password sync to happen if they want to get into their computer. The other thing you can do with all of these tools is create user accounts just in time based off the identity provider credentials. So for example, if you wanted to have a system where there's no admin account on the box until you need one, you can actually go in and create an admin account with admin privileges, and it will read that attribute from the identity provider saying, you belong to a special group, you're an IT member, excellent, I'll make you a local user account, I'll give you admin rights. And the nice thing there is that you can even go in and destroy any admin account on the box completely, including that Jamf management account that you're forced to create as part of your pre-stage, as part of the MDM spec. So you can just eliminate them all. And the most secure computer's admin account is one that doesn't exist until you need it. And so you can just make them as you go. Life is good. One of the other new features that you can do with Jamf Connect specifically is that you can enforce offline multi-factor authentication. So with this tool, you actually will tie into the authenticator application of your choice. So if your identity provider is using something like Okta Verify or Microsoft Authenticator, or you like 1Password like me, any authenticator app, Google Authenticator, will be able to tie in. You can create a backup passcode just in case somebody loses their phone or it drops in the fountains of Bellagio, et cetera, et cetera. And you can save that code as an emergency backup. You as an administrator, of course, can also run commands in order to clear that passcode, or you can always tell the user just log in online and use whatever multi-factor authentication that your identity provider enforces. And then the CEO on an airplane situation still has advanced security. I could go in, still type in my local password, pick the local login, and I'm just simply prompted for that TOTP code. Now, there is always a chance that the TOTP code could get out of sync because of the time difference there, but it shouldn't be too much of an issue because all the devices still end up talking to the same time server. So everything talks to time.apple.com. So they should all stay in sync pretty good. So additional security when you're using something like one of these tools. You have a record of all of the user account logins. It's going to be in your identity provider. And if you happen to be offline, you can also enforce additional methods of security, which we happen to be seeing from an awful lot of cyber insurance, security insurance providers nowadays. So we're getting multiple carriers are demanding that all logins, even offline, have multi-factor authentication. We just showed using it all the time, all the tools all the time. You do not actually have to use all the pieces all the time. So for example, if you have a lab environment where users might be just ephemeral sessions, essentially, where somebody randomly could walk up to a random computer in the shared desk environment, maybe you just use the login screen. Maybe ongoing password sync for that user doesn't matter to you at all. Awesome. Just let them log in. It'll create a real honest-to-goodness local user account. It'll have local file storage. You could always map out additional file shares at that point with automation if you desire. And then just maybe at the end of the day, the end of the week, the end of the term, the end of that class, all the user accounts just get deleted automatically. I'll show a cute trick about that a little bit later here. So. Maybe you have computers that are already deployed. So maybe you already have a computer, you're good. You've typed in, instead of first name dot last name, you just picked Fluffy Bunny instead. No problem, that's a great username. Stop stealing my passwords, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anyway, doesn't matter. Fluffy Bunny's local user account can be Fluffy Bunny as long as it matches up with Sean.Rabbitt's Okta account. Awesome. So as long as the password's the same, IT's happy. So you could just use that for one-to-one machines for ongoing password sync. Or use them both together all the time. Maybe just create that local user account, keep the login screen there active, turn on FileVault. They'll never see a macOS login screen again. Awesome. And then if somebody accidentally dumps a Coke on the keyboard and has to borrow somebody else's computer at the organization, no problem. First user logs in with FileVault. Second user, Apple menu, sign out current user. They see an identity provider screen. Awesome. They can now just log in, create a user account, do that presentation, sell, make $1 billion, and then when they hand the computer back to you, you just log out and delete their user account. Yep, board never changes, so the login screens that you see there with all those tools, Jamf Connect, Xcreds, etc., still falls into the same category of what you saw with FileVault login. So unless you purposely turn off automated pass-through FileVault login, people might not see the login screen. The macOS login screen, that is. They'll see that very convincing decryption screen. So just be aware of that. If you try any of these tools out and go, oh, it's not working, it's like, no, you have FileVault turned on. I'm doing this right now as a public service announcement for my sanity, because I have explained how FileVault works about 7,328 times in the last 5 minutes. Anyway. So remember all those lovely command line utilities that I talked about earlier? Well, what happens when you have a cloud identity provider and you have something automating all these account creation? You don't need those utility commands anymore, do you? Of course you do, because let's say that you did want to go through and automate the deletion of all those user accounts. Well, you're still going to need good old Discal. So you would go look for an attribute that user account has on it that would be unique because they're using one of these tools. And in Jamf Connect, our unique identifier is we add an attribute called OIDC provider. Sweet. If it says that user's tied to Okta, that's one of the Jamf Connect accounts. Awesome. So I can collect up all those user accounts. And then let's say that I wanted to put all those user accounts into a touch file so that way I could run a command later once that user's logged out, so I could build a smart computer group in order to run a specific policy at the end of the night that just happens to go through and nuke all the user accounts. Well, it's going to work great, except your last user account that's an admin in the box that happens to have a secure token can't be deleted because macOS still thinks that it's like from 7 years ago, and you can't delete that because the secure token user is going to be gone and blah, 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 and all that nightmare. So you're going to need another command. You're going to need that good old ds-edit group to be able to elevate someone temporarily so you can then make sure that you can delete all the accounts you want on the box. And I went through this all really fast, and I also put the, yes, I don't trust you. So when you want to see the details of this, we actually did this last year at JNUC. So this particular workflow was available at a JNUC presentation called One Account to Pwn Them All. And the code with all of its instructions and how you can go in and automate the deletion of user accounts, be it those shared user accounts that you're doing on lab machines or just nuking an admin account after the last 60 minutes, all the code's available up here on my GitHub for you too. So we got about 20 minutes left, and we've talked about so far things that exist right this very second. We're going to now enter the realm of speculation and unreleased features, which is fun. But first, let's talk about what's actually out right now that might be in your near future, and that is something called the Single Sign-On Extension for Enterprise. If you have a cloud identity provider right now, it is very possible that you have this really cool new feature. So the cloud identity providers that are currently available include Okta and Azure, aka Microsoft Entra ID, because they just changed the name again. Those two identity providers allow you to have an application installed on the device that will cache the credentials for the identity provider in that app, and then automatically sign users in to that identity provider's gated places. So like, let's say you're trying to get into Salesforce, or you're trying to get into Workday, or log into Jira or whatnot. Instead of having single sign-on be type the same credentials 27 times a day into 27 different things, it could be type in the credentials literally once, and then the helper application will log you in automatically. It is so choice. If you have the opportunity, I highly recommend picking it up. It works right now for Okta and Microsoft. They work a little bit different, and the profile to be able to do this is standard. This has actually been around for a little while. This has been out since macOS 10.15, and it's been built into at least Jamf Pro since that point. They both work a little bit different. They do require an app be installed on the device, but what happens is when you go out and hit a resource on the network that's gated with that identity provider, there's some login, be it a SAML or an OAuth, OpenID Connect. Sometimes it's third-party applications to things like Microsoft Office, for example. If I wanted to log in, they have something called MSAL, the Microsoft Authentication Library, in order to log in. That will get intercepted. And what happens is that the network layer actually says, hey, I see you're going to example.okta.com. Awesome. I'm going to redirect that to this locally installed application, which in Okta's case is Okta Verify. In macOS, it's the company portal application, and iOS for Azure, it's the company portal app on macOS, and it's the Microsoft Authenticator app on iOS. But it basically says, okay, app, you go out and you hit a special endpoint just for you. You're going to get something called a primary refresh token. If you ever, if Kerberos tickets are ticket granting tickets, this primary refresh token is a token granting token. And so it gets that token initially, and then it intercepts and then says, okay, here is your token in order to access that service, be it Jira or Atlassian or Salesforce or Workday or whatever it is out there in the world that you're accessing. When they go to the next thing, it'll automatically just log them in. You just won't see a login screen. It's beautiful. It's like awesome. I can get to all of my toys and not have to ever type my password again. It's cherry, absolutely cherry. This was introduced again, macOS Catalina 10.15, 4 years ago. So why did I explain this if it has something to do with Jamf Connect and all that fun stuff? Well, there is something called platform single sign-on that is coming out from Okta, officially announced so far. And what that does is it adds in one little extra thing. Not only does it go out and get that token in order to access a service, it also happens to keep the local account password in sync. That relies on a bunch of special permissions. So we have a security entitlement that's granted to the application that comes in from Apple. It is a local password sync from the cloud to the machine, not the other way around. So it's not like you change your password when you're bound to AD and it changes your AD password. You must be using macOS Ventura or greater. It relies on a .well-known endpoint provided by the identity provider's login piece, so you can't just have any application go out there and do it. So like if somebody like JumpCloud decides they're going to do this, they'd have to actually make special modifications to their well-known endpoint. So it's not like Jamf can write an app like this to do this. And so far, the only public announcement, and I say that because I know there's been another announcement, has been Okta at the IT tech camps with Apple and Okta there. So it is not released to the public yet. It still hasn't been released, even though it was announced a while ago. So platform single sign-on, the reason I say single sign-on was introduced 4 years ago is that it's taken 4 years from the announcement of the framework to get what's available today in Ventura. Platform single sign-on and its abilities will be the cutting, bleeding edge, if you will. This is what it's going to look like to your end users when it happens. First, you have to have a local user account. It does not make user accounts. You're going to get a random message that pops up in the notification center. You're going to get a button that says, then go check and log into your browser. You'll have to move the window aside. Don't ask me why it's designed that way. You'll log into your identity provider. In this case, it's going to be Okta. Once you're logged in, that essentially charges the single sign-on application. So now it has a primary refresh token. Then your user gets a bunch of random messages like, okay, type in your local account password, and then they gotta click yet again on the sign-in button here that magically comes up, and they now have to log into their Okta account again. They press the sign-in button, and then that's it. So what's your local account password? If you do decide to do this, there are some great sessions here at Mac Admins about Nudge and Swift Dialog to explain to your end users what they actually just did, which I would highly recommend educating your end users of what's actually going on there, because now your local account password on this Mac is your Okta password, whether you know it or not. Kind of interesting. As of macOS Ventura, what this actually does, here's the chart that's the difference between all those tools like Jamf Connect and Xcreds out there in the world versus platform single sign-on. You have to create a user account first on the box. You do not get any ability to determine if that account's going to be admin or not, et cetera, multi-factor authentication, blah, blah, blah. Both of the tools are allowed to get Kerberos tickets. One still needs the Kerberos SSOE. Jamf Connect and others don't need that in there. You get the cloud IDP, gets the logs, et cetera, et cetera. And there's one thing that's called out specifically in the guide that says screensaver unlock that's like, I don't know if it actually updates the password for the local account if your Okta password changes that screensaver.
If MFA is already set up and then you're now introducing this platform SSO, is there a prompt for that at all to verify the account, or how does that kind of work?
The question was, if multi-factor authentication is already set up on the identity provider side, is there any prompt for setting that up on when we're attaching it to this account? The answer is, great question to ask your identity provider, because the answer is still up in the air. Multi-factor authentication and conditional access rules may or may not actually apply at this point here, and also there's no way to I'll get into that in just a second, because we need to talk about something big in the room. We don't talk about betas in public forums, right? Especially when there's a video that's up here that's going to be exposed to the world, but don't worry, what we're about to talk about is available to the public. So the full platform single sign-on extension development guide and spec, the 2.0, is available to folks that are a member of the beta Teams out there, or if you have an Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager account, you should be able to access these URLs and be able to get this information. So we're going to talk about what happens once macOS Sonoma comes out, and that is platform single sign-on changes. So platform single sign-on should theoretically allow you to create user accounts. It should be able to read an attribute to determine if someone's an admin or standard account, and it probably won't work in a zero-touch enrollment flow. So the way that it looks like right now is that you, as the administrator, need to enroll the machine in the MDM through automated device enrollment or whatever method. You, as the administrator, have to create an administrator account on the box. You, as the administrator, then have to enroll the machine. So the machine gets a machine-level certificate from the identity provider to say, yes, you have the ability to create user accounts in the future. You, as the administrator, and I'm still talking about, like, you have to physically touch the machine to do all these things. To get that device PRT in order to allow it to create user accounts, and then will that login to enroll the device be subject to conditional access or device authentication rules from your identity provider? Still don't know, because nobody supports this workflow. It's 100% on the identity providers to write these applications and to support this flow and to document it, which means you've got to wait from Okta and Azure and everybody else out the world. Google has no public announcements whatsoever. I have not seen anything from anybody else that's supporting this. So there might still be a place for all these other tools we've talked about in the world. Remember, we are at a point in the universe right now in this reality where people are still binding their Macs to Active Directory. Some people are using the Kerberos single sign-on extension. Some people are using Jamf Connect. Some people are beta testing the platform single sign-on, and it all is happening at the exact same time. But that's been like that for a while, right? People are going to use the best tool that's most appropriate for what you need. And if you need offline MFA and zero-touch enrollment and whatnot, you might be using tools like Jamf Connect, Xcreds, et cetera, for a while. This new enrollment flow has some different authentication scenarios for the login screen, which might make it interesting for what a local account's password actually is. So there is a password sync, much like what Jamf Connect does now. So it goes out and hits an ROPG endpoint and actually determines, yes, this is the password for that user. Therefore, make their local account 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there's also that scenario where maybe you have Azure federated to Okta or Ping Fed or whatever it is out there. That's federation means that Azure doesn't know what the Ping Fed password is. So it's called a workspace federation. It just gets a SAML token back, which means that the identity provider can't verify that's actually the password, so that local user account password might be synced up, or there might be 2 passwords for that account. Still TBD. There is a token that's actually in the secure enclave for that user when this another flow is enabled that allows you to log in with the identity provider password, but then there is definitely still a separate local account password, which makes it extra confusing for your end users. And then, of course, there's the most fun one, which is the smart card PIV. Yay! And you can actually tie a smart card or PIV to your identity provider, log in with that on the device at the login screen, in which case you have no local password, but you definitely are going to have a local password because you have FileVault. Getting fun, isn't it? Yeah, now you know why I drink. Anyway, one thing that is interesting about this one that I'm looking into, and I don't want to talk too much about it, is that the identity provider can actually pass, that identity attribute can actually come back with group membership in it. And built into the spec is that you can pass up to 100 groups in that identity token to create a matching local group on the Mac OS device. So there will be a Unix local group that matches your cloud identity provider group, which might get interesting. So there might be some place in here for improvement in all the tools to have much more granular PAM rights. So like maybe we could enable somebody to do a device driver, but not enable and install applications. Something interesting for the future. There's also this concept of the shared device registration. So what's going to happen is the computer will go out to the identity provider and get a computer-based token, which it stores in the secure element. Still up in the air on if that's actually going to be able to happen, zero touch, or if you, the administrator, have to touch it. That enables shared device mode in their definition, which then allows the user to create a user account with those, with their credentials on the device. Password countdown still needs a Kerberos ticket according to its own spec. So if you've got a password policy out there, please don't expire your passwords anymore. It's not worth it. Then your user's still gonna have to have a countdown from there. You're still gonna need the password policy command to log, to invalidate a user account on the box. So you can't just turn off their user account at the identity provider. You gotta still disable account password access, which means, congratulations, you're gonna be using all those commands we talked about at the beginning until the end of eternity. This is where I'm wrapping up here for you, but the final thoughts I want to leave you with is that Mac OS is Unix hardcore. FileVault gonna FileVault, absolutely. It's gonna be here forever. Congratulations, you're gonna have a local account password forever. P-SSOE, interesting, very bleeding edge. Let's see what happens in Mac, maybe not at Mac OS Sierra, let's see what happens in Mac OS El Segundo, or the next one, or what so on. But it's interesting to see. Let's try it out, and if you have an identity provider that's going to support it, test it out. They will definitely want your feedback and help, and definitely 100% if you are testing it out. Feedbackassistant.apple.com will become your closest friend. Before you roll anything like that out to prod, though, please test. That's all I ask. If you would like a copy of any of the slides that I have done here today, they are available right this very second on my GitHub, and they will be available on the PSU Mac admins files soon. And I will be at our lovely Jamf booth downstairs, and I will not turn into a pumpkin after this. So for you watching on the YouTube later, I'm sure I will talk to you at some point in the future. Thank you very, very much for coming, and I appreciate you, and any questions I can answer for folks. I'm going to give you a catch box. Let's see if I can lob this appropriately. There you go.
I don't know if you glossed over it or if I just wasn't listening.
Talk directly into the box. They can
I don't know if you glossed over it or just I wasn't listening at the end there. If an account, like say with Okta with this platform SSO, an account is deactivated, a user is offboarded, what happens to the account connection piece on the Mac side? Or do we still need to have those kind of offboarding workflows in place and all that?
Excellent question. So to reiterate, what happens if I disable a user account from the identity provider side? Do any of the tools actually lock the user out of the local user account? No. The only way that I can lock a user out of a local user account by disabling in an identity provider is to use an on-premises Active Directory and be bound to AD. That's the only way I can lock that user out reliably. And even then, you'll still want to send down either an EFI firmware command from the identity provider, from the MDM, or use the password policy and disable that user account. Good question. Just remember, it's still a local macOS user account. There you go.
Specifically with the offline MFA, I know we can turn it on through Jamf Connect, but can we enforce that the user has to enable it and use it? Or is it just up to their discretion if we kind of flip the switch in the config profile?
As of this version currently being recorded, which is 2.2425, there's reporting capabilities to say if it's enabled or not, which you could use your tools in order to encourage the user to sign up for it. But as for enforcement, I don't believe it's in there just yet.
Thanks.
I am the only thing keeping you from lunch. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you for having me.